তুমি এটা পেয়েছো তো আমার কোয়েশ্চেন গুলো?
Yeah, so we are live now. Just please wait for 1 second.
Okay. You tilt your head left, it goes right.
Yeah, yeah.
Very good evening, friends. I'm delighted to welcome internationally acclaimed and award-winning poet Sudeep Sen this evening, who will be in conversation with me. Before I introduce Sudeep, I would just like to inform you that my business partner, Shushrota Shorkar, will be with us for technical assistance. Thank you. So I take great pleasure in introducing Sudeep to you. I'm sure he needs no introduction, but nevertheless. Sudeep Sen's prize-winning books include Postmarked India, New and Selected Poems, published by HarperCollins, Rain Aria, Fractals, New and Translation Poems, Erotext, published by Vintage Penguin Random House, and Kafi Azmi Poems Nazms, published by Bloomsbury. Sudeep has edited influential anthologies, including the HarperCollins Book of English Poetry, World English Poetry, and Modern English Poetry by Younger Indians, published by Sahitya Academy. Blue Nude, Anthropocene, Ekphrasis, please pardon my pronunciation, and New Poems, and The Whispering Anklets are forthcoming Sen's works. You will be very happy to know, viewers, that his works have been translated into more than 25 languages. His works have appeared in the Times Literary Supplement, Newsweek, Guardian, Observer, Independent, Telegraph, Harvard Review, the Hindustan Times, the Times of India, Indian Express, Outlook, and broadcast on BBC, PBS, CNN IBN, NDTV, and Doordarshan. Sudeep is also the editorial director of ARC, as in capital A, capital R, capital K, Arts, and is the editor of Atlas. He is also the first Asian honored to deliver the Derek Walcott Lecture, and he read at the Nobel Laureate Festival. The Government of India has awarded him the Senior Fellowship for Outstanding Persons in the Field of Culture and Literature. Sudeep, thank you so much for being here this evening, and thank you for your time. I'm sure the readers are going to be very enriched listening to you this evening.
Thank you.
All right. My first question, Sudeep, is when and how did your journey as a writer begin?
So good evening, everybody. It's good to see Kolkata and the surroundings of Kolkata again, particularly the wooden frames of the windows, which are so typically from there behind your head. So I suspect that my journey of poetry started before I was even born, in my mother's womb. Because actually, it's the cosmic sound of the churning and the sounds you pick up even before you're alive really provide the sort of template for your later rhythms. So that would be the sort of metaphysical, spiritual origin, I suspect. But my first poem was written in a extremely banal, boring circumstance. I was, I think, in
Okay.
high school, maybe class 8 or 9 or 10, I think, and I was in the back row, falling asleep in my Hindi class, and I wrote my first poem, I think, and continued writing, since then. And so it was, a response to boredom to start with, but of course, it's become an obsession and a lifelong journey since.
Thank you so much. Wow. Okay. What does poetry mean to you, Sudeep?
Everything. Life begins and ends with poetry. The entire cosmos is actually run on poetic plans. If you think of the way planets move, it's
Yeah.
a beautiful architecture of poetry, the rhythms and so on. So you have the sun. Even if you take our own solar system, you have all the orbitals and the planets and so on. The way they move, the Milky Way, the galaxy, and the sound of the cosmos. But ultimately,
Yes.
poetry, in a sense, even though it started as a very hard thing, it is a very hard um, genre art, I think. Um, but when you think about it, it is the most intimate as well. So
Yes.
invariably
And
on your
personal.
website and personal, I mean, of course, you try and make the personal into an universal when you're trying to finish a poem, because then
Yes.
otherwise everything becomes just about you and the person you're writing for or whoever
Right.
it is. But
Right.
very often, when you look at the books on your bedside table, you'll invariably have some poetry in there because it's the sort of thing that you read in small doses, and you have to come back to it. And let's not
Yes.
forget, in our most important moments in our lives, we resort to poetry: birth, death, marriage, all the rituals, all the songs we have are essentially poetry that is sung out, dance, music. So even though when people say that in the literature it's fiction and so on, which is sort of mainstream, what they don't realize is
Yes.
actually poetry is much more closer to our skin and is in everyday life. So to me, of course, I'm biased. It means everything.
Wow. Okay. Um, what, according to you, makes good poetry?
Just good writing. I think just good, clean writing, which is non-infected by viruses. And
Okay.
by which I mean bad grammar, clutter, overambition. It takes a long time to craft a poem down to something that is readable and properly sort of presentable.
Right.
Ultimately, it's if you want to if you when you visit a poem 2 years later and you say that this is not bad, then you think you've done all right. But what tends to
Okay.
happen is, a lot of I see that with the social media right now, a lot of youngsters, write a poem the night before and it's on online within an hour, and they get 5 likes, and the sixth like comes from Uzbekistan, and they are internationally acclaimed. Um, the comments are things like awesome, fabulous, this, that, and the other. I mean, the level of criticism is extremely, in general, very poor. So what makes a good poem is, simple as what makes a good piece of music or dance. Well crafted. It needs to communicate to any person. It should cut across any kind of divide. It's high and low brow don't exist for me. Anybody who's interested and feels for the arts should be able to access any good piece of writing or music or dance.
Okay. Right. And how has, we would love to know how has poetry affected your life?
As I said, for me, it's the lifeblood. It's every day for me. So I can't think about life without poetry. I mean, of course, at one level, it's a conscious choice that I've embraced it in a sense that people embrace jobs and life. For me, every breath is a poem. Everything I do is a poem. Whether it's good or
Wow.
not is a different thing. But, for me, that's how I
Yes.
look at it. Because it's very important. What does poetry actually, when you define poetry, a lot of poetry is based on harmony and balance, and that's what people are seeking. When people ask me about lockdown and how difficult it is, how quarantined you are, I tell people that most of my life I've been in a quarantine. It's an everyday affair. I spend a lot of time in solitude and in a room, just reading and writing. So it's life really. It's an everyday thing.
Do you think it's a
It
lonely
allows you to
process
reflect
somewhere down the line?
it allows you to reflect and breathe. It's like an yogic
Right,
exercise, meditation.
right,
But at
right.
one level,
Wow.
I might sound it's the whole thing is sort of so spiritual. It is spiritual, but it's also extremely concrete.
Okay,
Very, very concrete.
okay, wow. Okay. Thank you so much. Um, Please tell us briefly about the books that you have penned and how were you inspired?
The books are too many to even list. I mean, you've listed them all, so I was exhausted listening to your description of what I've written. No, so there are so many different books, and each book is very, very different from the book that has been published before. It's a personal sort of thing that I like to challenge myself, so I don't want any book that I'm writing sort of similar to the one I've written before. So I experiment with not just genre but form and content and style and so on. So one is of course pure poetry. Then I've worked on prose poetry. I love nonfiction essays. I do write essays, and uh, but the other arts influence me a lot. Especially classical Indian music and dance and the visual medium, painting, cinema,
Right,
and,
right.
uh, and the finer arts. So that's where the whole idea of ekphrasis comes from. Its response to the
Okay,
other art. So
right.
in a sense, I feel very, very inspired and challenged by other very good artists who are doing beautiful work. So, for instance, the book I'm writing, working on, which is probably the question you probably ask at the end, what am I doing now? It's actually a
Right.
book called The Whispering Anklet, and it's my obsession with classical dance for the last 30 odd years. So it's all about dance. It's all about responding to dance.
Beautiful,
So yes,
beautiful.
the world is
So you've got the
whole.
performing arts also in your poetry. Isn't that wonderful?
Yes, yes. I should probably read out a poem from that particular work in progress.
Please, why don't you? Please,
Yeah.
go ahead.
So, so as I said, this particular book is called The Whispering Anklet,
Yes.
File, and this one called Kathak is dedicated to one of our best contemporary dancers, Aditi Mangaldas. If you've seen her both classical work and modern dance and contemporary dance, she's just absolutely electric, I think. So this is inspired by one of her dance performances called Kathak. Deep within the eyes of a dancer, irises and poems bloom. On her cupped, curled, coal-lined eyelids, similes smile. On each eyelash, metaphors arch, waiting to flutter. On her bosom's electric silk fabric, secret lyrics are bloused. Her limbs, slender extension tips, decant arias, Tumris sing, soar, a balletic grace, liquid. She dances on water, always afloat. Even Khusro and Kabir, stunned, tongue-tied, searchingly compete to compose couplets for this dancer's next movement. Pupils wide-eyed, she cajoles, seeking her lover. Hidden in the dancer's heart, the beloved quietly resides.
Absolutely marvelous. Beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sudeep, you have collaborated with a lot of artists, filmmakers, musicians, dancers, and your latest is Love in the Time of Cholera. Let us play the teaser and we
Yeah,
shall talk after that. Yes.
super. Fantastic. The film is made by Anirban Dotto, and it'll be released very soon.
Okay, great.
And it's based on the eponymous poem "Love in the Time of Corona."
Yes. Can you see? Can you see, Sudeep?
I can indeed, yes.
Okay.
Let me play it.
This is, so,
Such a life enduring parallel. 20 years, yet my heart flutters, infatuated like first love. My hands twitchy, palms sweaty, pulse too fast to think. In thousands, migrant workers march home, social distancing, a privilege only powerful can afford. Cretans spray bleach on unprotected fur, clap and plates, ring bells, blow conches, light fires to rid the voodoo. Skies in spring, ash gray to silver white, then to age white. Young steam, slow grating metallic crackles struggle to escape the filigree windpipe. I persist in my plan. I'm afraid of it. Hope deep in our songs in present tense.
Very intense and very profound. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I'm sure the viewers did did as well.
Yeah,
So,
I think there
Shri,
was some.
tell us
I
a
think
bit.
there was some broad bandwidth issues, so it was struggling to roll. Um, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Yeah.
Please go
I
ahead.
said I suspect there was some bandwidth issues, so it was struggling to roll. And
Yeah, yeah,
also,
yeah.
it was interesting because I've heard the soundtrack, and it now has the added ambient sound of the Kolkata traffic at the back as well, outside your house. Yes, go on.
Yes. So, could you tell us about the film? Could you tell us? As I said, the clipping was very profound and very touching, very intense. So, could you please tell us a bit about the film that is
So,
coming,
the early days of
that is due
lockdown,
to
I
be
wrote this
released?
poem. In the early days of lockdown, I wrote this poem called Love in the Time of Corona, which actually is an interesting story. The editor of the Indian Express, a very fine novelist himself,
Yeah,
Raj Kamal Jha, he
Rajkumar
invited me
Jha.
to contribute a piece for their op-ed pages, and he probably thought that
Wow.
I'll contribute something, a non-fiction piece from a point of view of an artist. Little did he know that I'm going to send him a poem. But he was very bold and he carried the poem on the Express pages and it really flew from there.
Wow.
It's been published in the UK by in a world project by Caroline Duffy. In the US, it's been also has been translated into Persian, Bangla, Hindi, Marathi, Serbian. So it's taken a life of its own. And I've
Wow.
been following this young filmmaker, Kolkata-based filmmaker called Anirban Dotto, who I've actually not met. We still are supposed to meet. Well, we will meet when we, in the same city. And I've been watching his visuals and clips he's been putting up, and I was very, very impressed by the aesthetic quality, the noirish, very, very exact, poetic aesthetic quality of his work. So that's how we kind of got together, and then
Okay.
he produced this first cut, and I was amazed. I was amazed at the way he interpreted the whole thing. You know, so when you see the whole thing, you
Right.
realize, and he uses these curled leaves, which obviously fell in his bagan courtyard after a rainstorm,
Yes.
and they were all aligned in a
Yes.
sort of in a particular line. And he pans this camera from the left to right, and to me, they are these migrant workers marching, helplessly. So it's amazing what happens when another artist sort of looks at your work and
Yes.
makes another sort of narrative in a different genre. So it's
Right.
very pleasing to see that. Yes, and so kudos to Anirban.
Wow. Kudos to you too. I loved what I read. All
Thank
right.
you.
Um, welcome, Sudeep. Okay, so could you tell us about one of your newer books titled Erotext, published by Vintage Penguin Random House? And it is on the 2020 Rabindranath Tagore Literary Prize, shortlisted along with Amitabh Ghosh's Gun
Yeah.
Island. So, is there a central theme? And could you also read excerpts from the book?
So Erotext, I suspect the best way to describe Erotext is it's a book of experimental short fiction, microfiction, but you can also call it a book of
Okay.
prose poetry. And this
All right.
is how it looks. There we go. That's a better image. And it essentially deals with the 5 Ds: desire, disease, delusion, dream, and downpour. And each
Okay.
section essentially expands on those themes through images and
Right.
words and a narrative. So it's a very, very unusual book. It doesn't have a sort of straight narrative line, but then each
Right.
piece has its own soul, and then each group kind of makes itself like a particular island, and then the 5 islands become a world.
Okay. So, do you want to read excerpts?
Yeah, maybe I'll read one piece from here. Um,
Please, please.
and the thing is, this was written a while ago, but the piece I'm going to read is called Ozone. And when I read it now,
Right.
it sort of reflects the situation right now: the lack of air, the pollution,
Okay.
the wearing of a mask, the aerosol, and so on, the spraying. But this was written in a very different context. But there you go. That's what I was talking about earlier, that how you make something personal into the universal. So a piece can stand on its
Universal.
own
Yes.
in a different context, in a different climate, looked upon by different eyes and through different ears. So this is called O zone. The spray of scented chill pierces my lungs first. Then comes the slow, desperate heaving, the grinding spasms playing, trying to centrifuge stubborn curves of mucus, whose greenish yellow viscosity remains more deceptive than quicksand's subtle death trap. My face, confined in the transparency of plastic, frosted glass, and thin air, regains for a moment the normalcy of breathing. It is a brief, magical world. The oxygen in my blood is in short supply. I feel each and every electron's charge spurring my senses. Dizzy in aerosol hope, I try to free myself of the medicated mask, but the frozen rain that batters my face reminds me of the tentativeness of living. As I survive on borrowed air, I'm grateful to the equation of science, its man made safety, its curious balance that adds precious molecule to create the sanctity of O3, the holy Brahmanical triad, the triumph of its peculiar numeric subscript. My breathing is temporarily back now, electrolyzed, perfectly pitched and nebulized, as narrow, transparent tubes feed dreams into my wide, opaque palate. The sun's edge is dark, so are my hearts. No amount of air will light them up.
Beautiful. Sudeep, you have such a gifted pen. Honestly, honestly, I'm
Oh,
so,
thank
so
you so much.
overwhelmed.
That's very
Most
kind.
welcome.
That's very
Not
kind.
very kind, that's the truth. Amazing, amazing. All right. Recently, a book of interviews was also published. So, could you
Yes.
tell us about it, please?
Yeah, so this is how it looks. Let's see. You'll probably have a image there. And
Yeah.
this is part of a 3 volume project. The first volume came out, in fact, when I saw you in Kolkata. The launch happened at the Oxford bookstore. So the first volume is a book of interviews. The second on
Right.
reviews and essays that have been written on my work over the past 30 years. And the third one is sort of nonfiction I've written. It's published by
Right.
Classics, which is a Kolkata-based publishing house, and two young poets, writers work as the editor, and they've done a marvelous, marvelous job producing the book. And it's really it's actually when you see the book that you feel that, my gosh, so much work has been done. So it's a good way to aggregate things as well. But when you read the poetry or when you read my short fiction, you see one side of my life. But when you delve into the interviews, it actually shows you another side of the human being. And so I think it's very useful for people who follow literature, poetry, and so on. And
Right.
uh, and really, they've done a wonderful job. And not just that, I think it's a real contribution to Indian poetry,
Okay.
archiving contemporary work. I don't think too many
Hmm.
publishers are doing that. I can't think of any, in fact. So kudos to
Okay.
Classic.
Oh, okay. So, Shri, I would also love to know uh, how strict are you when it comes to pushing yourself to write regularly?
I'm very strict when it comes to writing. I'm very strict when the words are on the page. So there was a time when actually I would spend 2 hours every day with poetry. In some way or in one way or the other, I actually end up spending 2 hours with poetry every day. It's not as though I can write something new. Often I'm just revising my old work, and if that's not working, I'm reading other people's work. I'm writing on poetry. I'm reviewing. I'm editing, so on. So it's my tapasya riyaz with poetry. You have to be at it, to hone your skills.
Yes,
Otherwise, you can.
absolutely.
And it also brings you to a moment of stillness and silence where you can reflect. But
Yes,
once I've written the poem, then the strictness that happens is in the crafting of it. The inspiration is all very hard and inspirational, and it sort of strikes you as lightning. So all that is
right.
wonderful. But the initial inspiration is just like a blob of clay in front of you. Then you have to take the chisel and start crafting it. And that can take a long, long time. And then often I find it's good to revisit the piece after a gap. I also have
Yeah.
some trusted people who I show my work. They're not necessarily literature people, but they have a very fine eye and ear, and they're intelligent. So they just tell me what works and what doesn't work. And they are ruthless. So I'm actually grateful to them as well. Um,
Wow.
but yeah, you have to be very, very strict. You see, the thing is, as writers, we get away without going to the gym and so on. And Bengalis are particularly good at not visiting such exercise parlors. If I was a dancer, then I had to be much more careful because part your body is also your vehicle. But
Yes.
I use my gym. I think my head and my strictness is my gym regime. I will try and
Wow.
hone the words as much as I can. I read out ozone, and you saw that. Each
Yeah.
word
Yeah.
in relation to the other is weighed and weighted. It's calibrated to the point that there is a sort of larger balance and electricity that sort of transmits between the neurons of the words.
Yes.
So very strict.
Wow. You're very disciplined, I'm sure. You're very, very disciplined.
In my own sort of way, I am.
Yes.
I'm anarchic when it comes to when people see me. I'm not a 9 to 5 person, but I am very disciplined when I'm in my box of poetry and writing and literature. Yes, yes.
I'm
But I
sure.
also
I'm
like
sure.
white space. I also like days of doing nothing, just looking at the sky and enjoying a glass of wine or two or three, and to an
You
external eye.
introspect then, do you?
Sorry, say that
I
again.
said you introspect at these times.
You
I said
have
you
to.
introspect at these times. Yeah.
Yeah, white space
Yeah.
is just as important. Reading is just as important. You know, to keep
Yes.
yourself on the edge, you also have to read a lot of good literature that's being produced, and not just literature, politics, news, what's happening around you. Love in the time of
The whole
Corona.
gamut.
it is a poem at the end of it, but it's actually a treatise on what's happening in the world right now, especially in India. It deals with the
Yes,
migrant issue. It deals with the sort of COVID situation. It deals with so many different things. It deals with the
issues.
lack
Yes,
of tactility, that we can't even touch our own face, forget our beloveds. So it's very, very strange. So yes.
right. Absolutely. Right. Um, who is your favorite poet? And would you like to describe his or her work to us?
Dear, 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 dear. That's a tough one because there have been many favorites, and I still have many favorites. And the favorites also change with age and time and my reading. The more I read, the more exposed I am to various people. But to give you an easy, pat answer, I'll say maybe three poets. The king of poetry is God, whatever he or she is. Maybe the muse, Bacchus, the one who inspires poetry, Zeus, maybe, Saraswati, perhaps. Number two would be Milton. I mean, can you imagine a person
Okay.
writes one poem and takes 12 books to do it and decides to write a sequel and does it in another four, Paradise Lost and Paradise Regained. And the
Regain.
third on the list is Derek Walcott, undoubtedly. I mean, he won the Nobel Prize with his book-length poem called Omeros, and he's written
Right.
several book-length poems, Teopolo's Hound being the other. So I would say those three, but very close contenders would be also, depending on my mood, Joseph Brodsky, Seamus Heaney. There are so many, Octavio Paz, Pablo Neruda, Paul Celan,
Yes.
endless. Jivanananda Das, Ghalib. The world is full
What
of
about
fabulous.
T.S. Eliot?
T.S. Eliot, of course. I mean, T.S. Eliot is as modern as we got when I was studying literature in college. So
Yes.
yes, T.S. Eliot had a profound influence when I was young, and that was useful. And his criticism, particularly, was very interesting. Just as say Matthew Arnold's criticism is very important to read. But one has
Yes.
moved on.
Matthew.
How
Yes.
can you not be influenced by T.S. Eliot when you're growing up or in the contemporary space?
Yes. Okay. Um, have you ever faced writer's block? And if you have, how did you overcome it?
Happens all the time. Writer's blocks are like speed breakers. You just have to ride the bump. It happens all the time. I mean, the thing is, as I said, if you spend some time with poetry regularly, it may not be every day, but hopefully fairly regularly, then the times I'm not able to write something new, I'm actually engaged in reading other people's poetry or engaged in poetry in some way. So your machine is still oiled. And I can't expect to be inspired every day. That would be crazy. Imagine being inspired every day and writing every day. I mean, I would love it. I mean, if that sort of lightning strikes. So you ride the block phases, the writer's block phases by doing other things, by watching dance, music, reading books. There are many ways of doing it. So you're never really blocked. It's an excuse. The block happens that you may not be able to write or may not be able to move from one movement to the other if you're writing on a piece. That happens because of mood and circumstance. So, just be engaged with the craft and literature and the wider field of arts and the world. And, it's normal. It's normal life, actually.
Absolutely. Okay. Great. Um, so, what are you currently working on, Sudeep? And would you like to share some thoughts with the viewers?
So I actually read out that poem Kathak, which is actually from my current book in progress, which is called The Whispering Anklet. And, the whole series of poems there are all responding to either an artist or a dance production or an aspect of dance. So it covers most of the dance forms, Kathak, Bharatanatyam, Mohiniyattam, Kalaripattu, ballet, It's a really exciting project because now two of my dear friends are going to collaborate with me. So I've decided it's not just going to be a straight text poetry book, but it's going to have photographs in it. So initially, I thought, say, Bharatanatyam poem will have Bharatanatyam dancer. Then I realized that's getting too boring. It's becoming like a catalog. So I wanted just very beautiful abstract photographs of a dancer. Sometimes even if you don't even know who the dancer is, just swirls and
Right,
swishes of fabric and so on, or very very tight close
right,
up of the eyelash or the toenail or the ghagra or the anklet itself. So informally, I was sitting with Aditi Mangal Das and I asked her, could she model for the book? And she was very sweet. She
wow,
said, I would love to do it, but all my gurus will, be very angry because I'm relatively not the oldest dancer in the in the scheme of things. I said, don't worry, it's my decision. Just send them to me, and I'll say it was not her. And then, of course, another friend of mine who's a very, very fine photographer called Dinesh Khanna. He shot her for the book. And the photographs have come out gorgeously, drippingly fabulous. They're just so stunning. And it was an interesting experience because
wow,
initially I thought, we could just shoot her. And she was very insistent that, she needs a makeup team and the lights and so on. And I said, these are just not a professional shoot as such. She said, no, no, no. And then she insisted, and I'm glad she did because I realized why. So when we did the first shoot, it was in a closed, regulated space with lights and so on. And she did like whole performances. She says, you don't realize that you have to get into a whole mood, and when you're shooting close ups, makeup is very important, and so on. It was an amazing experience because I'm sitting in this room, just a few of us, the crew, and her dancing for us. And so, yes, so when that book comes out, it'll be a lot of fun because the three of us hopefully will kind of do a road show together. If we have a performance of the
wow,
dance, reading, and then the exhibition
fantastic.
photographs. So hopefully at some point, Kolkata, we'll have to talk to you to get it over.
Okay, definitely. Looking forward, absolutely looking forward. When is it going to be published?
Hopefully at the end of the year. Yeah, everything is sort of now shifted.
End of the year.
It's at the design stage, and I
Okay,
need to sit down with the designer, but distancing doesn't allow that. So it's kind of stuck because of that. The book is written, the photographs are
okay,
taken, it just has to be put together.
okay. Fantastic. Good luck.
Thank
Um,
you.
so, what can your readers expect from you in the future? And would you like to speak about your future projects?
I think more madness. I think we need a bit more madness and a bit of free spiritedness and a bit of harmony. I keep using that word because we just are in such difficult times.
Yes.
Um, but yes, more poetry, and also the collaborations are very exciting. The film aspect of it, so more of what I'm
Yes.
doing. Um, but it's challenging because we are all sort of now we have to recalibrate how we work. So we are working from these silos. Like I'm sitting here in Delhi in Chittaranjan Park and talking to you. Okay, so this is now happening. Everything is on the screen now is coming as these little rectangle pixels. It's very odd. You're speaking to a crowd and they're all in pixels, and people are commenting. It's all on the chat scroll on the side. But yes, let's hope the things open up. But at the moment, the arts. I mean, you look at what has happened to the arts world. Theaters are closing down in Britain, the big ones. But if
Yeah.
you see the New Zealand Prime Minister, she's just promised $175 million for supporting the arts in the country. We need visionaries like that in the world.
Yes.
So yes,
Absolutely.
let's hope we have people like that in our country who think that arts are the
Fingers
arts.
crossed.
Are
Fingers
yes,
crossed.
yes.
Okay. Um, what is the message you would like to give aspiring poets?
One thing, just read a lot and write. There is no other way. And write regardless of whether you're inspired or not. That's where the tough part happens. Fair weather writing is very easy when you're inspired and when you're in love or when you're sad. Yeah, sure, it's easy. But when nothing is happening, that's the time to continue writing and reading and read out of your comfort zone, really. You don't read across the board. And those are the two basic things I would say, both for youngsters as well as for practicing writers and artists.
Okay, okay, fair enough. And what is the message you would like to give your readers?
Enjoy it. Ultimately, it's all about pleasure. If you're not enjoying reading what you're reading, then it's not worth it. It just becomes a
Absolutely,
monolithic tome. So enjoying
absolutely.
is very, very important. Even if you're reading a book of economics, if it's written well, you enjoy it. Which is why there are certain kinds of people who translate their professional art, and they're able to transmit it to a lay audience with intelligence because they do it with simplicity. You have this
Yes,
wonderful writer called Pico Iyer, who writes just so exquisitely, so beautifully, but
beautifully.
actually
Yes,
this the whole idea of silence emerges so beautifully. You have
yes,
Amitabh Ghosh, who writes so beautifully when it comes to non-fiction. There are hosts of people. Siddharth
yes,
Mukherjee, when you read his book on cancer or gene, you don't feel you're
yes.
reading it. Book.
Marvelous, brilliant,
But story, it's a
brilliant.
story, and a story, and a story. So you get swept into the narrative and you start enjoying it, and
Yes.
that's really it.
Thank you, Sudeep. Thank you for such an enriching session. Brilliant works. I was so overwhelmed with whatever you read for the viewers. I wish you all the luck in the world. You do Bengal proud and you do India proud, and you are a global writer. I hope your audience globally continues to grow and wish you all the luck in the world. And thank you so much for being with us today. Have a
It
very
was a
good
real
weekend.
pleasure. Thank you. Thank you,
Take
really.
care.
It was a pleasure. Good night and
You're most
enjoy.
welcome. Thank you. Looking forward to all your publications and the film.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sudeep. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.